Okay, I think you get started.
Okay, this is the Street Funding Task Force meeting number 9, and it is September 27th at 11 o'clock.
October.
Oh God, sorry. I have some chair comments. So my goal for this meeting today is that we get ready for our November 17th work session with the council. They don't expect us to come in with fully vetted ideas, but partially vetted ideas, I would tell you. My goal is that it not be maybe more than 3, 4 at the max. Sorry. And then what we're going to expect from them is to tell us if they're interested in every proposal and having us flesh it out more, or if it's a proposal that they are not interested in at all. So if there's something they're not interested in at all, that we don't spend extra time on it. I'm going to ask that we use 3 or 4 task force members. So 1 each for each proposal, so that, you know, half of you will get an opportunity to be able to talk about what you think works. And does that seem okay with everybody? Okay.
Yes.
So Chad, you're on.
Thank you. Yeah. Back on Ann's comments, we gave you some financial models and gave you a summary. We'll look at some of those, but I just wanted to make sure we look at the order of magnitude. You know, we ran 16 different models. We can run more or less once we kind of know what this group wants. How are you going to make your decision on options? Is it the tax rate? Is it the levy changes? Is it, I mean, you need to know that to really dive down. They're just big pictures. So I think you have a pretty good understanding of the minimums and maximums of where all these options kind of land. So that was our primary goal. Maybe I'll just jump into one of those and just show you. Bring up the summary table just to explain it a little bit. So here's the summary table. So option 1 was 50% assessment, 50% tax levy dollars. We ran those transitions. And then if you look at the first percentage, that's that assessment reduction year 1. So 11%, we take out the subcut of 450,000.
Could you increase the size of the screen there?
Increase the size. Is that better?
Thank you. Yeah.
Then years 2 through 6, we'd have a reduction in assessments of 7%. Next column is increase in the levy. First year is 450,000. The remaining years are roughly that second number. Same thing with the levy per year percent. First year would be 1.07, with roughly 0.75 the remaining years. And then we only did a couple calculations because the city portion of the tax really is governed by the subcut. So year 1 would be $65 or 400.18%. We used the big subcut number, $91 or 5.91%. Ran both options. I don't want to get too much into details. I just wanted to explain how I reported it here. I tried to simplify it.
Chad, can I ask a question?
Sure.
I didn't see anywhere, I didn't understand, is this taking subcut out or including it in the assessment?
These models are taking it out year 1 and then transitioning over the next either 5 years, 10 years, 15, or 25 years. It's removing the subcut year 1, and that's where you'll see if you take out 450,000 a subcut, it would reduce the assessment 11%. Use that $1.1 million subcut number, it would reduce it 28% year 1.
So Chad, let's talk about those 2 subcut numbers. Did you do an average what created those 2 numbers?
So we have subcut every year. So I went back through all the projects. We have it every year.
Right.
So I kind of developed a range of what out of that $4 million for assessments, how much is subcut every year. So it's kind of finding a low number would be the 450,000. And the high end would be, just above, it'd be 28%. So 1.1 million is what we're seeing. Two of our worst case neighborhoods over the years and one kind of scheduled for next year. That's where those numbers came. It was a range.
So Chad, does if we're looking at doing something perhaps starting in 2022, do we have any idea of what streets you're looking at and what that subcut would be in 2022?
I do not have the subcut numbers. We do those soil investigations 1 year out. They would most likely fall within this range. So that's a question of if we develop a policy and the number's at 500,000, but you've decided to take $1 million out of assessments. I think our language has to be clear of we're going to be over or under these numbers, and how is that handled with future assessments before we transition down to the final number. So I have the estimated street costs for the next 6 years in our CIP. I can give you the overall, and we're running between 3 and 6 million a year for the next 6 to 7 years.
Any other questions on that first one? Do you want to go down to option 2?
Option 2 is the 100% option, and it just shows none of the numbers change except for the increase in the levy. Because we got to make up another 50% change in the levy, and then the percent, the second percent numbers. You'll see they pretty much double from the other scenario. But the hit year ones are pretty much the same, and then the hits over the years would be roughly double of what they were in the other scenario. But it still falls within these ranges that we're sharing.
Now, Hamid, you were on an email exchange about.
I'm sorry, I just lost you. Hello? Let me put on myself on mute so I can hear you better.
We all lost her, Hamid.
So, Hamid, you were interested in a 1 year transition now, is that correct? You're muted.
So I'm sorry, what was the question, Anne?
I looked at some emails back and forth.
Right.
With, I think it was starting with how many people moved and that. And you said you were now interested in maybe only a 1 year transition. Is that what I saw?
Well, I think ideally, given the document that I attached, ideally one would think about in a 1 year transition. But I'm certainly cognizant of the difficulty of, I'm certainly willing to compromise. So at the end of that document, I suggested a 2 to 3 year, let's say a 3 year transition would be acceptable. So I was thinking for a median value home of about $163 increase per year, that will amount to about $54 a year increase in the tax incidence for the median value home, and it would increase each year up to the third year, which does not seem to me a large number. Then the back and forth email had to do with 25% number for people moving in and out was an accurate number. And I think the last email there, it started with David Kendall's asking a question, and I think Rolf responded to that. I think Chip suggested that it may, I'm sorry, it was Matt that suggested it may be more like 33% if you include those that have already paid their assessment. So that was the sort of back and forth email on that number. But my main point was that if you think about the property owner, their incidence of increasing the tax rate increase relative to the total tax bill is extremely small. It's like 1.0 some percent versus, I mean, it's like in the second decimal, it's 1.025 versus 1.054%. I mean, if you think about relative to the total tax bill rather than city portion.
You're not trying to convince me. So what I want to know is if we're going forward to the November 17th meeting, does one of our options for this group need to be what you're proposing? Because Donna and I figured it out as if we transitioned in a year, if we were to do it this year and we took the budget that the city already has and then we added streets on it, the tax rise would be 14% if we did it in 1 year.
Relative to the city's tax base.
Right. No, 14% for a homeowner. So it would be what they already, what did they pass in September? 5%, 4 point something, Don? So it would be an additional 10% higher tax. So a median house would, if we transitioned in this 1 year, would be paying $216 more, and $1.5 million house would be paying $500 more. So what I want to know is if we're going to take proposals to the council on November 17th, do you feel one of them has to be a transition within this, whatever you want? 1, 2, 3 years?
I would suggest, given the steepness of the 1 year transition and all of the back and forth, I would suggest, even though it's ideal to do it right away, but I would say 3 year, a 3 year, 100% transition would be what would my position be?
Okay, so I'm going to then ask, because I don't want to, if this is what we're going to take one of these forward, then I would ask you to be the one with Don's help at giving you the numbers.
Sure.
You're going to have to, so we don't have a lot of time at these meetings. So if we're going to take that forward, you got to be able to present it in like 2 minutes.
Okay.
So I'll have you work with Don. Is there anyone else in this group? Yes, Ralph, I see your finger up.
So I guess I think it's appropriate for the group to decide what 3 options we'll bring forward. And I'm not sure there's anybody else who supports a 2 to 3 year option other than Ahmed. So I think so. Before we nominate him to carry that forward to the council, I think we need to decide as a group what are the 3 options.
Okay. I was going to do it the reverse way, but I'm fine because I agree with you. We need to support what we're going to do. So if we decide that goes forward, that's comments. Okay. So of the 50% assessment, 50% tax, do we have, how you want me to, how many people support that concept? But I don't have the years yet. So just tell me who supports a 50-50, or does it depend on the years?
This is David. I support a 50-50. I mean, the transition period is different, but I support a 50-50.
Yep, and Kathy does, and I do. Matt, where are you?
Well, I support a 50-50, but my preference would be for a longer phase-in.
Okay, yep, got that. Chip?
As I look at the numbers on the spreadsheet, I'm leaning towards 100% over a long time period.
Okay, and Ralph?
I'm leaning towards 100% over a 6 year time period.
Okay, so Kathy, Matt, David, Ann are at 50-50. David, what's your preferred time period?
10 years, but looks like 11. 11's
Okay.
fine.
Kathy?
10 to 15. 15.
So that's a 16 one. Okay. Matt? Are you the 26 years?
No, I mean, I'd at least 15 years. 15 years or more would be my preference.
Okay.
Yeah,
So
kind of.
Kathy, Matt, and Ann are all at, well, right now it says 16 years, and David, you
Yeah.
are at 11, correct?
Are we saying 16 instead of 15 because we can't start right away?
Originally we did the subcut year 1 and the rest of it years 2 through 15, correct, Chad?
Correct, and we can do any number. They're just models, so I guess the other question to ask the group that maybe Ann's getting to is the subcut. Is that just in the transition from 0 to 50%, or should we pull subcut out year 1 and then transition down to 50%? So that's a question for the group.
Kathy, David, Matt?
So if I'm reading this model right, it looks like this, Chad, that in this model, option 1, the subcut is taken out in the first year, and it looks to me like it's a reasonable financial path forward if we do that. I was concerned that we wouldn't be able to do that also, but I think it's probably doable. So I'm in favor of taking the subcut first year.
Okay, and are we going for a $450,000 subcut or $1.2 million or somewhere in between?
I
Doesn't
think
that
Chad,
depend on what we're doing?
Chad and Don have laid out the range. And, as we've all agreed, it varies from year to year, but on average, it sits in between there. So I don't think you can say it's one or the other.
If we just back up a second on the subcut.
Sure, Chad.
And I'd like to talk about the logic for taking out the subcut in year 1. I mean, I understand what the subcut is and how that's, kind of roll the dice and you don't know really what the land is going to look like. But in presenting this to the council or to the population at large, what is the logic for backing out a subcut number in year 1? If we're going to back out year 1, why not year 2, 3, 4, whatever? Or I guess my preference is to say, well, if we're going to, let's just not do the subcut. Let's just work on whatever transition we want to work on. It, for some reason, seems to me that gives some, tilts the playing field a little bit to whoever falls into that 2022 or the first year road construction work. So I'd like to hear other people's thoughts.
Anyone on the 50-50 want to talk about the subcut? Because we can talk about it differently in both options. So let's just talk about it as you would talk about it in talking why you would think option 1 works.
I guess I could share my thoughts.
Go ahead, Kathy. Go ahead, Kathy.
I didn't think we came to a conclusion last time on taking the subcut out, so I'm a little bit either behind or confused on that. But I think if we went to a 50-50, I think we can leave the subcut in the assessment because we've already reduced that quite a bit.
Okay, David?
I could agree that. I mean, I guess I'm not. It's not gonna make any difference to me whether we leave it in or leave it out. I think both solutions are fine.
Okay, Matt?
I concur. It doesn't really matter whether it's in or out, as long as it's 50-50.
Okay.
May I make a comment? This is basically, I'm thinking to develop a sort of to talk with Rolf about this option of tie subcut in with the option of 3 years, my horizon versus Rolf's 6 years. I'm wondering if Rolf would be willing to compromise with 4 or 5 years with subcut removed, so that we would have a number where both of us would be on the same page in terms of presenting it to the council.
Ralph, I mean, Hamid, you broke up a little. Did you hear what he asked, Ralph?
Not clearly.
So I'm thinking, given your comment, Ralph, that we need to have just three positions to present to the council, and given that your time horizon and mine are not too far, we're both on 100%. Yours is 6 years, mine is 3 years. I am wondering if by removing the subcut and my moving to 4 years or maybe 5 years, whether you and I could be on the same page in terms of making that one of the three options to present to the council.
So first, let me talk about the subcut for just a minute. The reason in my mind I've separated out subcut is because I feel it's one of the true fairness issues with respect to homeownership in Edina, and that it's not fair to the particular homeowner who happens to live on a street that needs to be dug out 2-3 feet versus a homeowner that doesn't. And so I think to me, it comes down to a fairness issue. It comes down to, if you will, how the street should have been built initially. I could see going to, a 5-year period. All I've tried to do with whether it's 5 or 6 is to say, if we take subcut out year 1, the remaining years are very easy to, is it 25% per year? Is it 20% per year? But that it happens on a fairly clean percentage and a quick time frame. I'll stop.
Okay. I actually agree with Ralph. I think it's a fairness issue on subcut. I think as a city, we should be able to, as you say, tell each homeowner that we expect the road that was built the right way. And if it wasn't built the right way for its subcut, that's the city's obligation to cover that. You can't be drilling in the street when you're buying a house to tell what the subcut will be in 4 years if you're going to have your street reconstructed. So for me, subcut, like for Ralph, is a fairness issue.
So let me counter on that, Ralph, just a second.
Yeah.
My question is, I would agree that it's a tough role if you happen to have a big subcut cost on when your street gets done. But is it really? Why is it fair to do it 1 year and every year? Why just do it that first year, not the second year, third year, fourth year?
No, you don't understand. You take the subcut. You take the subcut out 100% from year on forward.
So Chip, the minute the subcut comes out year 1, then that cost is embedded into the taxes for the next year. So it gets paid going forward. You just see the increase in your tax bill as a resident in year 1, but then it's always in the tax base to pay for in all the ensuing years. So once you charge your homeowners in year 1, you now have it covered, as long as we pick an amount that is appropriate to do. As Ralph said, we've got a high and a low, and somewhere in the middle is probably where we need to be.
So let me make sure I understand that that whatever it's the 450 or the 1,125,000, that's just levied in that first year, and then whatever method we choose thereafter, work up towards that 50-50, 100%, whatever, over whatever time period. But we don't, so that we've taken out a subcut amount that presumably is based on what the work is to be done in that year. Are we going to be looking at a number that we think is a fair amount on average that we're going to throw to the community to cover? And then, okay, I see what you're saying.
We'll do that every year, correct?
The number will be set year 1 with the levy. So I wanted to clear up the subcut. If we have a range of subcuts. So the thing I tried to articulate at the beginning of the meeting is, if we set this number at 700,000, and if next year's projects have $1 million of subcut year two, there's still going to be a tiny portion of subcut that's still going to be assessed. So we have to be clear in the language that we're going to cover subcut up to a number. Some years we're going to cover more than what we're subcutting. Some years we're going to cover less. A little bit of benefit in the assessments moving forward. So I don't think we can have a hard number.
Chad,
I'm sorry.
can't you put a subcut number in, and if you have a year, let's say it's 500,000, the first year we do it and we've charged for 750. So we have that money waiting in Don's checking account until we hit a year where we need more. So we are actually going to be able to cover the subcut if we just pick an average number that's higher than the 450, but maybe not the 1,125,000.
So if we collect more, you're putting it into a subcut street fund. To use.
Yes.
Years we go over, we could take there. Years we're under. So Don's not shaking his head.
Well, I'm shaking my head too. I mean, if let's say we set it at, take the average, say we set it at 800,000, that's where the assessment level is going to be. Don, and Don, if you could answer this question, are we saying that we don't have, that the city doesn't have the ability to cover that $400,000 without having to do special assessments? Yeah, you understand the question?
Yeah, in that first year, cover that initial 400 or?
No, so let's say we set the assessment level at 800,000.
Yep.
And the first year, subcuts happen to come in at $1 million. And so are we saying that there's not $400,000 of investment money that the city has that could cover that in the short term and carry that year to year, year over year?
Yeah, well, yeah, from a cash flow perspective, we certainly could cover short-term deficits, but there has to be a longer-term funding solution.
There's an option. May I suggest an option here that we're not talking about? What if we do what banks do in terms of escrow? Imagine a situation where 1 year you're a bit short, and the next year you have a little bit of surplus. Going back to Anne's comment, what if one simply says, okay, this year we were a bit short, so next year we'll change the levy by the amount of shortage. It's like an escrow account. And then if it's surplus, we'll just apply that to that year. So that way, except for the sort of working forwards for the shortages or the surpluses, would that be a possibility, Don? Like an escrow account?
We can always levy more, so the taxpayers would just be paying more. So yeah, that's certainly not an issue.
But I'm
Ralph,
talking about
the biggest issue that you asked though is, no, the city doesn't have extra cash that it doesn't have in its budget for it has a small maybe emergency fund, but you basically budget for what you think you're going to have in costs for the whole year. So if all of a sudden we have another $400,000 in subcut costs that we haven't budgeted for, that's got to come from somewhere. And yes, we could maybe cash flow it, but you're going to have to charge the taxpayers the next year for that. You can't just, you be cutting snow plowing or you be cutting something. 73% of what the budget for the city is goes to city employee costs. So it's not there. There isn't extra cash floating around that you can grab from one pot and put in another. Don, sorry.
Yeah, Ralph, I would just say if we needed additional cash to add to the subcut or whatever, I think what we would do is just bond for it and we would levy taxes.
Mm-hmm.
Can I on that?
Kathy first and Chip.
It makes me uncomfortable to think that we would put a proposal together that's not kind of fully financially put together, leaving a hole in it. If we only have 700 and it's up to 900. And we have to account for that in, I think, whatever proposal we bring. And I hear us trying to kind of walk around that, and I don't think that's going to be what the council would be looking for.
But
Chip,
yeah, I think what the models that Chad and Don put together assume a $4 million, street fund every year. The reality is it's not going to be that. It's going to be 3 million. It's going to be 6 million. It's going to be other things in between. It would seem to me that every year we will look at what the reconstruction cost is going to be, and then we do figure out that split between the levy amount and the assessed amount year by year. Isn't that the underlying assumption? We're not going to be working off of a hypothetical 4 million and just use that, and then if there are pluses or minuses, there's some other way to fund it. Seems to me every year, because you are, my understanding is you contract for these things ahead of time, so you know what the cost is going to be by the time we get to the point of levying for the year. Am I misunderstanding that?
I would hope we're doing what you're saying, Chip. That's kind of what I was trying to say as well, that we bring a proposal that we know how we're going to pay for things.
So
May I?
Don.
If I-
Don.
Yeah, I would just say that, Chip, and what you just mentioned, I would really try to hold Chad to around that 4 million, plus or minus a little bit, because we won't be able to accommodate a $3 million project one year and a $6 million project the next year. Depending upon how the assessment is split, the city just won't be able to make up that much difference in a year. Does that make sense?
Saying the city would make up anything. It would either come by the assessment or come by the levy. So it wouldn't be, the levy would come from, it would be balanced every year.
Doing this with the levy every year.
So
Yeah,
I think what Chip
administrative.
is saying, Don, is that our initial plan for year one is 4 million. And then if the next year Chad was to come in with a $6 million project, which happens in the winter, then you would have to add 2 million on. But the problem is, Chip, is that it then collects for 6 million forever for the streets. So the trouble is it's not like you can float the levy based on what you need.
But you can float it based upon the percentages. You can kind of try to, work on achieving the whatever, if we're going 50-50, kind of by the end of year two, it's, 75-25 and keep working on those percentages and split the money accordingly.
May I?
Ahmed.
I don't think that I don't see anyone answering the suggestion I made. Imagine a bank escrow account. The amount of taxes change, and therefore, when we escrow our taxes, banks always are going to have either a surplus or a shortage the following year, in which case they adjust. So I don't see, except for the very first year where that might be an issue, I don't see why, as Chip was suggesting, why we can't have an estimate of the costs next year, or maybe if there were already excesses or shortages, adjusted through the tax levy. Is there a concern that once the tax rate is set, we cannot change that? Side where
No, the tax
shortages.
rate is set in September.
My point is that the question is whether the adjustments up and down could occur in a separate account, which is akin to banks' escrow account. Is that, from the accounting point of view, is that a feasible model or not?
So what I think you're saying, if So the tax rate is set in September, as Ann had mentioned, so that can't change.
Correct.
But if we collect more in any one year, we certainly can put it into an escrow. I mean, it would just be a
Yeah.
construction fund for us. So we can certainly bank that balance for future years.
Yeah.
But what my concern is, if we go from a $3 million levy one year to a $6 million levy the next year, that difference will be hard to get past because it's too
If
big.
it's too large, you're right. If the gap
Too
is too
large.
large, even escrow won't be able to accommodate that. You're right. But that's kind of a rare. I guess that would be a very extreme scenario.
Ralph, did you have something you wanted to say?
Well, I guess if we think it's hard for the city to predict this kind of cost, what do you think about homeowners? I mean, really, I get Don's point that the levy would have to move up and down depending upon how much the subcut was year to year, but quite frankly, the variance in the subcut isn't even from high to low isn't going to drive. It won't drive the $3 million variance that Don just mentioned. It may drive an $800,000 variance, if you will, from the very low number to the high number. And the point being that the tax rate, as we've just said, is set in September. We know what projects are going to be done next year, and they've been quoted. So we know how much that levy has to be to cover those, if you will, the subcut associated with those projects. And so we don't need an escrow.
No, but once you give that levy, let's say you have to levy more because the subcut's going to be $1 million and we've only planned for $500,000. Once you levy that, you don't give it back the next year. It's on the tax rolls for all the years after that. So what are you saying no to, Ralph?
Are you saying that we can never lower the levy?
Oh yeah, no, you can lower the levy, but
Well,
I'm just going to tell you from a council point of view, that's really awkward. They want to be able to set what they're needing money for and plan on it going in the future evenly and not have it go up and down. David, you're raising your hand.
Yeah, Chad, I have a question. And it sounds like the way the $4 million is managed is that we meter the projects and plan the projects so that what we need to do in a given year adds up to about 4 million so Don can help pay for it. So is that solution available at just a higher number? So let's just say it was 4 million, now it's 4.5 million, just to pick a number out of the air because we want the city to pay for subcut. So can you meter projects year by year with the subcut included to end up at 4.5 million, just like you do today with 4 million?
Yeah, today we do it by neighborhood. So that's where we get a $3 million project and a $5 million. In the future, if this is with 100% assessments, that just worked because it was all paid. It didn't matter.
right.
If we go to one of these mechanisms, we would look at historical costs and really drive the linear foot of streets to match whatever the number is that this group sets. So it'd be more what Don said. We would have to program to that 4 million or 4.5 million. I think we only have about 18 minutes.
Right.
Okay.
So the question I think that was out on the table yet is who supports subcut coming out year one or who just wants that in the transition? Because if it goes in the transition, the whole conversation we just had is maybe not irrelevant, but less relevant. So maybe I'll throw that back to Ann of just asking that question.
Okay, so back to if you're in favor of a 50-50 assessment, who is comfortable with the subcut being year one and then whatever time period left is for the transition? Raise your hand, I guess. And Matt, you're going to have to tell me because I can't see you. So I want subcut year one and I'm at 50-50. David's at year one. Kathy?
I don't see a need for that. I would just put it part of the transition, part of the assessment.
And Matt, what do you want?
I would be fine with it year one.
Okay. So at this point, Kathy, we're going to do it as year one.
That's fine. That's fine.
Okay.
So, Ann, do you have to, if you're going to be doing that or proposing it that way, do you have to, come up with a number? Do you want
Yes.
to talk about what number you want to have on a 5-year deal?
Yeah, I think we
deal?
probably should talk about that. Chip or Chad, what would you be comfortable if we were going to pick a number in between?
Well, maybe we'll just run the both scenarios for the council. We're just trying to get options. So maybe we run the 450 subcut, do pros and cons, share that with the council, and then do the high number pros and cons, and that's 2 options. And then we have
Chad?
the other. Go ahead.
Chad, can you say what number would, cover 75 or 80% of past projects?
I mentioned that this was just a general look. I would have to dig into those numbers over the last 10 years and maybe
All right.
have somebody do further research. So if council, if we don't even have support for this option, I didn't want to dive into those numbers. So I think
That's fine.
give the general options and pros and cons. And then if council really supports one, be happy to dig into the numbers and get you better numbers.
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you.
Okay, and David, you're at 11 years, and Kathy, Matt, and Ann are at 16. Are you comfortable moving to 16, or do you want us to present 11 and 16?
I'm okay with 11 or 16, frankly.
Okay. So at this point, let's just do 16 if that's okay with you, since we're going to have a couple subcut things. Great. Okay. So Ralph, Chip, and Ahmed, you are the 100% assessment group, correct?
Correct.
Ralph, what was your timeline again for 100%?
I'm comfortable with either a 5 or a 6 year time period.
Okay. Using both subcut numbers?
Taking subcut out year 1 and then the following years being the balance.
Okay. Chip?
Well, I was, I guess I could go either way with the subcut, frankly, but I was thinking to spread this out over what would be like a 100% 16 years. And my thinking there is that I think ultimately it's fairest if it's shared 100% in the taxes, and I think that 15 sort of year time frame gives enough of a gradual movement that current homeowners aren't going to be hit too hard by something that's put on them and they have to pay in 5 years.
Okay, and Ahmed, I think I hear you saying that you would be okay meeting with Ralph on the potential 6 year. Is that correct or not?
You're on mute, Hamid. You're on mute.
Yes? Yeah, you're muted.
Sorry, I'm sorry. I was saying, I hope Ralph would be willing to compromise on 5 years with me. So we would have a single number. And,
Okay.
With respect to subcut, I don't feel strong. If it's going to be 100%, I guess the subcut would be less of a issue. Am I right about that? Because subcut would be subsumed within the old full cost within 5 years, or is that still a separate issue, even if for 100% people? I'm not
could be.
quite clear about that.
Well,
If you're going to 100%, it could be taken out just over those 5 years, or you could do it year 1 and then the rest over 4 years. I guess that's a question. After the 5 years, it's going to be a.
Okay, got you. I guess I would probably prefer year 1 in that case, but I guess I don't feel strongly about the subcut one way or the other. But if it's I'm certainly what year 1 sounds good to me. I mean, I don't know what Ralph thinks about that in terms of.
The only reason I lean.
Yep. Go ahead, Ralph.
The only reason I lean towards year 1 is that I think it's most clearly a fairness issue. And so, I mean, if we go with 5 years in total, I mean, I could say, yep, don't even worry about the subcut issue. Just 5 years.
I'm fine with that.
So where does that leave? Wait a minute, Kathy. Where does that leave you 5-year people? That subcut is just included in the transition, or it's year one?
I would say year one sounded like, is
Okay.
that right?
And then Chip, on the 16, because I have you as 16, are you subcut year one and then 15 years of transition?
Yes.
Okay. And Kathy, you wanted to say something?
Well, I'm confused because if we're going to 100% tax, that's how we pay for the subcut. So I'm not sure what's different about the first year in that proposal.
It's how many years
Sure.
you transition.
The first year would drop it if you're using the big subcut number, would drop the assessments 28%. And then the remaining years would drop at 15%. So the benefit
But I
is just
thought,
getting the subcut out of the number. Eventually, you're going to get to 100% over
but I
the.
thought the proposal, the 100% tax proposal, the taxes have to pay for the subcut.
Eventually they do, but we're talking about how we're going to transition it and what year is going to pay for what. So
Well, how do we pay for the subcut then if we take that out of the taxes?
No,
we
it's in
charge
the
it in year
taxes.
one.
It's out of the assessments. Both options, all subcuts going to be paid for taxes is the options on the table right now. It's pulling it out of the assessments.
Well, this
year
is
one.
during the transition. I'm
That's
sorry.
That's
Yeah.
right. It's the transition.
Sorry.
Right. So because of
Sorry.
this, that's the discussion.
Matt, do you have anything to say? I see you're unmuted.
No, I don't. Sorry.
Okay. That's okay. I like seeing you unmuted. So we only have 10 minutes left. So I think what I see, Chad, is that we have a 50% plan that's at 16 years.
Correct.
And then 2 plans on the 100%. One is a 5 or 6 year transition and the other is a 16-year transition. So we're down to 3 plans, right?
3 plans. I heard 5 years for that 100% between Ralph and Ahmed. And then at the 100% number, then it's a question of the subcut year one. So we can run the high lows for those. So that's 6 options. My opinion, if you're going to 100% in 5 years, you may not even need to pull that subcut year one because there's not that much difference in those percent reductions in the assessments over 5 years. We can
Okay,
run those 6 options and get some summaries out to the group.
perfect. Now, there were some things, though, that we hadn't decided on as a group. And one was, well, they were lighting. What was it? Lighting. And then we'll talk about the state streets at another time. Lighting and retaining walls.
At fences and
Come up with a
irrigation.
lighting. If you're 100% of the assessments, gentlemen, are you looking at lighting included in that 100%? And do we offer it and pay for it then? Ralph? Yes.
Yeah, I think there should be a city standard.
Okay. We can say another task force can get together to put that together, right?
Well, I do have one idea before we close out, but go ahead and finish, Ann.
Retaining walls, if you're paying 100%, are you paying retaining wall repair, or not repair, but replacement when the street gets done? And what are we doing, Chad? Would that take care of that problem?
Well, both of those items, right? We're going to have a $4 million budget. And if we have a neighborhood that has lots of retaining walls, we're going to have to do half the linear footage of streets or whatever that number is. But
yeah,
the only funding source is the levy at this point.
Right.
I think
So
it's one of those things where we could.
Retaining walls and street lighting on 100%. Okay.
Can we do something? Is it impractical to for something like retaining walls to have that be less than 100%? Maybe that retaining wall cost is 50-50. I think that's
assessing for retaining walls when you're paying 100% of the street.
Yeah.
There's that there's a cost to running assessments. I don't know, Don, would that be worth doing if you're only assessing for retaining walls? Of course, we assess for,
Weeds and trees, that wouldn't be the issue, wouldn't be an issue.
I have a question about retaining walls. I'm not quite clear. Are we talking about retaining walls where a public situation is involved, or is this retaining walls that are more private or benefit one or two properties? Can you help us, Chad, understand what the retaining wall issue is?
Yeah, I can give you a background, but it might be a future discussion. These retaining walls are ones that were installed to support the transportation network, either to make room for the street or make room
I
for
see.
the.
I
They're
see.
not the ones that private people had put
So
up.
it's really a public
Yeah.
issue. Okay,
It's a
I get
public-
it. Okay, fine. And then I think that makes sense to be part of the whole, assessment 100%. It now makes sense to me. I just was not clear about what the concept. On the lighting, and I just want to make one comment. Lighting seems to be a neighborhood preference. Some neighborhoods want to have it dark, others want to have it light. That should be paid.
Yeah.
How do you see that?
Well, I think Ralph was talking about having a policy. So if you have a policy for a neighborhood, you could do it one of two ways, but one of parts of the policy would say the city will provide this kind of lighting at a minimum. If it's Cobra, it's this kind. If it's including also street lighting, it is this model of light, not, a choice of 15 different models. And that maybe, I don't know, Ralph, would you be then comfortable that the neighborhood could say, yes, we want pole lighting added to our neighborhood, or we only want.
I think you establish a city standard, to your point, and that, it's not like, gee, we can go in with antique lighting, and that we offer to the neighborhood. And if they want to vote on it and decide, that would be their option. But, it's something that's done in conjunction with the roadway, not
Yep.
that, well, gee, we'll come back later and
Right.
install it.
No.
Likewise with retaining walls.
So before we run out of time here at 11, we've got 5 minutes. Can I interrupt one thing? So are we feeling like we know enough now that we can go straight to the November 17th meeting, or do we need another meeting in between potentially to flesh out where we are on our 3 proposals and then who's going to present each?
We have another meeting scheduled in 2 weeks. And
Oh, we
that's
do.
1 week, and that's 1 week before the council meeting. So the difficulty with that schedule is if we're gonna put a packet of materials together, I need that done by that Tuesday afternoon. So we'd have the meeting and the packet would have to be done the same day. So I'm assuming the stuff I heard today is like gonna be my general kind of memo or whatever. I start to draft. You guys could review it at the next meeting. We can make some small tweaks, but it won't have a lot of time to make a huge change in that report or memo.
David, you had your hand up. Did you have something to say to that?
I was basically just going to agree with what Chad just said. But I think we're at a point where we can have a 95% draft and just walk through it. I think we ought to walk through it before the council meeting, but that's about it.
Agreed.
I think we should too. I would think we'd want to put in that report some pros and cons, and we haven't fleshed those out yet.
Chad, do you want to include pros and cons in it, or do you want us to discuss those when we have the 3 proposals in front of us?
I shared that document where our staff had put together the pros and cons of some options. So I'll use that. I'll put some draft. This is a draft document. I'll take a shot at pros and cons for each one of these and then send it out to the group. Everybody give me your comments back and then we can edit it in 2 weeks, meeting before it goes in the council packet. Does that sound all right?
Okay, so my expectation is that we'll read the pros and cons and we will, either way, whether you like them all and you don't need a change, or if you need things added or you don't like something, you will all get back to Chad one way or the other, telling him what you think. Correct?
And would you want, with those return comments, I think that's a good idea. Do you want everybody to be copying the whole committee on what
Yep.
their suggestions are?
Yep, I do. I think that's a really good way for us to be able to be thinking about things that maybe hadn't come up in our brains before. Okay, so you all saw the memo that we've already had a request for information about our last meeting, and that this one is taped. So that from now on, everything is taped. I think after we meet November 17th with the city, that is when we will go to, or with the city council, that's when we'll go to the city and ask them to start sharing some of these concepts on that we can do better. What is it called again, Chad?
Better Together, Edina. So we have a platform where we can push out press releases and get comments on whatever options the task force and the council kind of wants to move forward.
So we'll get some response first from council, and then we're gonna push out where we are to the general public, hopefully get some comments there. And so the meeting that we have after November 17th, do we have that on our schedule yet?
I think I scheduled them through the end of the year. I'll sure
I'm
and
just
not.
hamstrung because my iPad is sitting at home and I'm at Gull Lake. So I've become Judge Swenson for the day. I apologize, but I grabbed my husband's iPad and put WebEx on it, and I had to at least put his name on it and not mine.
The 24th is Thanksgiving, so I propose I'm going to be out of town that Tuesday.
Okay.
So
I have something
The
on
next-
the 8th of December, but nothing after that.
So we have one scheduled for the 8th, and that was the last one I put on the calendar. So I mean, on the 17th, I could restart those meetings on the 1st of December. Start them up again that way. Every 2 weeks.
So do we want to do December 1
1st or 8th,
and the 8th?
one or the other, I guess, to start the 2-week cycle again.
So the plan for us
Preference,
is
or we just
that
leave the
we're
8th?
going to get feedback from the public. We're going to get feedback from the council. And then we're going to work for about a little over a month and a half, maybe, to put this all together into whatever recommendations we have. And that we will give that to the new council probably in January. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay.
And a quick question, how soon do you think we hear from the council after we present on the 17th?
They're going to talk to us right there. They're going to tell us what they
Okay.
like and don't like.
I
That's
would
their
just
job.
add maybe
That's their job. That's what they get paid those big bucks for.
probably add a month in there and for the schedule, just to, let's say we draft a resident feedback comment period of 3 weeks. So that puts us at the end of December.
Yep.
Holidays, we'll decide, get all those comments in January. We're probably flushing out a policy. We haven't even talked about how to write a policy yet.
No.
Probably more in that February time range, early March for an actual go to council and get approval of a policy.
Yes, good point. So we do have the ability, though, Chad, if we want to have to look for a group to officially write the policy if we give them the parameters, correct? If we want to.
You might be looking at it with me and Don.
Well, that's a cheap way of doing it. I don't need any outside consulting fees.
Happy to help, right?
Okay. Yes, Ralph.
So I'd like to throw out one idea to the group, and actually it comes right back to what you're talking about, Ann, is I'd like the group to consider that the council actually doesn't vote on the policy, that we put it on a ballot referendum next November.
And they may choose to do that, and that
Yep.
may be part of our recommendation too.
That,
I totally understand what you're saying.
yeah, that as much as we struggled with who's hurt, who's benefited by this, that we come up with the 3 options, and those 3 options are put on a ballot.
Usually if you do a referendum, you don't try to do 3 options, but
Yeah.
we can talk about that later.
Yeah.
Referendums are really tough. You actually have to put money into educating people on that. So that would have to be part of a budgetary thing, but it's not a bad idea, Ralph. Any other questions? We're at 12:03. We're good?
Mhm.
Okay. Thank you all. And we'll,
Everyone,
at the next
Yep.
meeting before November 17th, I'll expect your comments to Chad in the meantime.
Thank you, Ann. Thanks, Chad.
Okay.
So-
Thanks, Don.
Thanks, guys.